What if the Bible's most forbidden truth isn't just ancient history, but a living pattern shaping our world right now? Today, we're going to decode the Nephilim, those mysterious giants, the so-called sons of God who took daughters of men, unpacking who they were, why they fell, and how their shadow still lingers. Stay with me to the end, because once you understand what Nephilim truly means in Hebrew and in classic Jewish sources, you'll see why this idea hasn't disappeared at all. It's simply changed masks. The first time Nephilim appear is already in Genesis, in the generation just before the flood. The text paints a society spiraling into depravity, a moral collapse that leads to a near-total reset of humanity, sparing only Noah, his family, and the ark. In the midst of this unraveling, we read something bewildering. In those days, there were Nephilim on the earth, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty ones of old, men of renown. It sounds like the Bible is hinting at figures larger than life, legendary, formidable, and deeply controversial. But to grasp this properly, we need to do two things: uncover what the word Nephilim really means in Hebrew, and ask who exactly these sons of God are. Let's begin with the Hebrew. Nephilim is related to the root nafal, to fall. That alone is a clue. We're dealing with a fall, whether from heaven, from moral stature, or both. One of the greatest biblical commentators in Jewish history, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, leans into this linguistic cue. He notes that Nephilim evokes beings who have fallen, and reading them alongside sons of God points to a dramatic idea. We might be looking at angels who fell. But here's where people often make a critical mistake. They rush from fallen angels to independent powers at war with God, as if there are cosmic rivals matching the Creator blow for blow. That is not the Torah's picture. In biblical thought, nothing exists outside God's sovereignty. No force can oppose him as an equal. Rebellion in the Bible isn't a rival deity rising up. Rebellion is a creature disobeying its maker, misusing the freedom entrusted to it. So what does rebellion mean for angels? Think of it the same way we think about a human being who chooses a path of blessing or a path of ruin. A person can turn toward life or toward death. The tradition explains that certain angelic beings were allowed to enter the human arena of temptation and choice, and they fell badly. Not because they possessed some godlike independence from the Creator, but because they misused delegated power in a realm where desire, pride, and corruption burn hot. Now, another towering voice, Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, known as the Ramban, takes a different route. He reads Nephilim as literal giants, human beings of unusual size and ferocious strength, physically imposing and socially dominant. Why call them fallen? Because of their moral collapse. Ramban draws our attention to rampant sexual corruption before the flood, worse, he argues, than what later destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. These were men who used raw power to terrorize communities, to violate boundaries, to seize women, to intimidate husbands, to rule by fear. Imagine walking in a city where the biggest men set the rules, where violence stalks every street, and where virtue is mocked as weakness. In that world, Nephilim names a fall, not from the sky, but from humanity's calling to reflect the image of God. A third line of tradition from the Midrash brings in another dimension. Here, sons of God doesn't mean heavenly beings so much as human elites steeped in the occult. They mastered sorcery and spiritual technologies forbidden by the Torah. Their shows of power led ordinary people to call them sons of God, not because they were truly divine, but because their abilities felt superhuman. Think of wonder-working used not to heal or uplift, but to dominate and corrupt, to twist awe into fear. In this reading, again, we're dealing with people brutally gifted, spiritually dangerous people who harnessed real, dark practices and turned them ruthlessly against others. But the most haunting portrait comes from the Zohar, the classic of Jewish mysticism. It speaks of two angels, Aza and Azael, not to be confused with Azazel from Leviticus, who question the wisdom of creating humanity. Why give such a high soul, they challenge, to creatures so prone to sin? God responds with a test. Descend into the human condition, face its desires and impulses, its cravings and confusion, and see whether you fare any better. They descend into the pre-flood world, and they fall. The Zohar ties this fall to the Hebrew itself. Nephilim relates not only to falling, but also to nefel, an aborted fetus. In other words, these were beings with enormous potential that never reached full stature, spiritually aborted before completion. The image is chilling: great capacity, incompletely realized, immense power, ethically stunted, something that could have become radiant, cut off before maturity. This mystical thread explains why the Zohar situates Nephilim around the time of humanity's creation, and why the Torah's phrase, "Let us make man," is so provocative. Why us? In the classic Jewish reading, God is addressing the heavenly court of angels, modeling humility and consultation even as he alone creates. Some angels affirm the project of humanity, others hesitate. The Zohar suggests that these hesitant ones, more like half-formed angels than fully realized ones, enter the human story and collapse under its weight. Fallen here means not rival gods, but disobedient emissaries, creatures whose rebellion is precisely that they refuse the will of their creator. This is why the tradition warns so fiercely against imagining any power as God's equal. To do so isn't just bad theology, it borders on idolatry, shrinking the infinite into a measurable rival. Notice how all these lines converge on the Hebrew. Nephilim means fall. It can signal a fall from heaven, a fall from moral height, or a fall from potential, a nefel, an aborted beginning. That single word carries a world of meaning: collapse from above, collapse within, collapse of what might have been. And the Bible doesn't leave Nephilim in Genesis. The book of Numbers returns to them when Moses sends spies to scout the land of Canaan. They come back shaking. "We saw the Nephilim there," they report, "sons of Anak, giants descended from the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in theirs." Rashi reads this straight. Giant people, massively strong, the kind of presence that shrinks your confidence the moment you look up. Other commentators note something else. These figures seem to wield powers that felt uncanny: sorcery, ritual, intimidation, creating an atmosphere of dread. Whether from sheer size or occult authority, the spies could feel their courage draining. But that's precisely the test. The same God who had shattered Egypt, the superpower of its day, was leading Israel into a land notorious for corruption. The mission wasn't only military, it was moral and spiritual. Israel was warned not to learn the ways of the nations there, not because foreigners are inherently evil, but because the specific cultures squatting in Canaan had rotted. Leave them entrenched, and they would become snares, teaching idolatry, normalizing degradation, seducing the heart away from God. History tragically proves the point. In Joshua's time and in the period of the Judges, the failure to uproot those influences fully leads to cycles of idolatry, injustice, and national crisis. We even meet a named giant down the line, Og, king of Bashan, remembered for extraordinary size and force. Facing Og, the people must choose: trust in the one who split the sea, or cower before the towering threat right in front of them. The Nephilim here function like a mirror. Do we measure ourselves by our fear or by our faith? By now you can see that the Nephilim are not a single flat category. Depending on the source, they might be fallen angels tested and found wanting, brutal human giants drunk on power, or occult elites whose spiritual prowess made them feel godlike. Yet the heartbeat beneath every version is the same: misused power and aborted potential. What should have risen fell. What should have matured twisted back on itself. The grandeur of the human calling to harmonize spirit and matter, heaven and earth, collapsed into domination, lust and fear. So what does that mean for us today? Here's the uncomfortable turn. Even if you never see a 12-foot giant, the Nephilim pattern can still be alive, and that's the forbidden truth we ignore at our peril. In the language of the Zohar, a person can become a nefel, a soul that aborts its promise when it severs its connection to the divine spark. It happens when brilliance feeds arrogance, when charisma becomes manipulation, when knowledge is bent into control, when desire drowns conscience. Think of someone with staggering talent who chooses exploitation over service, who magnifies self at the expense of truth. Think of systems that reward domination and call it success. Think of spiritual techniques stripped from their moral core and sold as power plays. Those are Nephilim shadows. Let me pause here and bring you in. Which interpretation resonates with you most? The fallen angels of the Zohar, the giant tyrants of Nachmanides, or the occult elites of the Midrash? Have you ever felt the Nephilim pattern in modern life, places where potential is immense but ethics are missing? Drop your take in the comments. And if this deep dive is giving you new lenses for ancient texts and today's world, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to send this to others who love big questions and careful answers. Back to the heart of it. The Bible's warning isn't a monster story. It's a mirror. Genesis shows how quickly brilliance can rot when desire goes ungoverned. Numbers shows how fear shrinks us until we seem like grasshoppers, even in our own eyes. The commentators show that sons of God can name creatures of power, angelic or human, who forget the purpose of power. And the Hebrew itself shows that a fall can be physical, moral, or developmental. You can tumble from a mountain, you can tumble from virtue, or you can tumble from your own becoming, never arriving at what you were made to be. Notice too how precise the tradition is about God's sovereignty. The Nephilim rebel, but they don't rival. They break the will of their Father in heaven, the way a rebellious child scorns a parent. That's a serious sin, but it's not a cosmic civil war between equals. Confusing the two leads quickly to idolatry, to shrinking God into a being among beings, rather than the source of all being. Get that wrong, and you'll misread the whole story. And the remedy? The opposite of the Nephilim pattern is patient alignment, using power as stewardship, not domination, using knowledge to elevate, not manipulate, honoring the body while listening to the soul. The giants of old terrified by size, the magicians terrified by spectacle, but the truly mighty of renown in the biblical sense are those who turn their might toward justice and mercy. The fall becomes a rise when we pull heaven and earth back together in our own choices. So yes, there were Nephilim in those days, and by the Bible's own words, also afterward. The names and costumes change. Aza and Azael in a mystical drama, Anak and Og in a historical saga, nameless tyrants in a pre-flood nightmare. And today, any arena where potential swells and conscience shrivels. The question isn't whether giants once walked the earth. The question is whether, in our time, we are choosing to grow into our full stature, or to abort our promise and call the fall power. If you've made it this far, you now carry the key the Hebrew gives us. Nephilim are the fallen, fallen from above, fallen within, or fallen short. You've seen how Rashi, Ramban, the Midrash, and the Zohar map the terrain. You've seen how Genesis and Numbers rhyme across centuries, confronting us with the same test. Trust the giver, not the size of the obstacle. Align with purpose, not the seduction of control. The shadow of the Nephilim is only as large as the light we refuse to turn on. Turn it on, and the giant becomes a warning sign, not a destiny. In the end, every day offers a small version of the flood in the ark, the spy and the giant. Desire surges, fear whispers, shortcuts sparkle. But you are not a half-formed being. You were made to finish the journey the Nephilim never did. Rise where they fell, complete what they abandoned, and let your renown be the kind that lifts others with you.